Chapter 5. He was a man of his word. He had said that he never wasted his time.
I could see that he never wasted either his time or his bullets. Whenever I heard his jeep arrive, I could see some bloody object, small or big, brought in, if I cared to peep out. But nowadays, as far as possible, I try to shut my eyes to it.
I was having a surfeit of it. Not in my wildest dream had I ever thought that my press would one day be converted into a charnel house, but here it was happening. And I was watching it helplessly.
Sometimes it made me very angry. Why couldn't I ask him to get out? This was my own building, laboriously acquired through years of saving and scraping, and the place would not have come to me but for a good Muslim friend who migrated to Pakistan and gave me the first offer.
If I opened the back door, I stepped into Kabir Street, and right across it to my own home. But all this for harboring the murderer of innocent creatures. I was brought up in a house where we were taught never to kill.
When we swatted flies, we had to do it without the knowledge of our elders. I remember particularly one of my granduncles who had the little room on the pyol, who used to give me a coin every morning to buy sugar for the ants, and he kept an eye on me to see that I delivered the sugar to the ants in various corners of our house. He used to declare, with approval from all the others, "You must never scare away the crows and sparrows that come to share our food. They have as much right as we have to the corn that grows in the fields." 95.
And he watched with rapture squirrels and mice and birds busily depleting the granary in our house. Our domestic granary was built not with concrete in the style of these days, but with a bamboo matting stiffened with mud and rolled into a cylinder, into whose wide mouth they poured the harvest as it arrived in laden bullock carts. That was in the days before my uncles quarreled and decided to separate.
Where am I? Yes. I was appalled at the thought that I should be harboring this destroyer.
Frankly speaking, I had no courage to go up to him and say, "Take yourself and your museum out." He might do anything, bawl me out, or laugh scornfully, or rattle my bones. I felt dwarfed and tongue-tied before him.
Moreover, it was becoming difficult to meet him. He was always going out and returning home late at night, sometimes being away for 3 days at a stretch. He returned home late at night because he did not want his booty to be observed by anyone around. When he was home, he was busy upstairs with the broth and molds. One heard the hammering, sawing, and other sounds pertaining to his activity, and sometimes during the day he hauled down packing cases and drove off to the railway station.
I noted it from my seat in the press and said to myself, "From this humble town of Malgudi radiate stuffed carcasses to the 4 corners of the earth." He worked single-handed on all branches of his work.
I admired him for it, until I suddenly realized that I too labored single-handed at my job, with the slight difference that Sastri was with me, but he had, I suppose, all those ruffians of Mempi lending him a hand in his nefarious trade. I do not know why I should ever have compared myself with him, but there it was. I was getting into an abnormal frame of mind.
There was no person in whom I could confide and from whom I could seek guidance, having always played that role myself. My visitors were, as usual, the journalist and the poet, both of them worthless as consultants. All the same, I made an attempt to ascertain their views.
The journalist was frankly dumbfounded when he realized that in this particular problem there was no point which he could blame directly on the government. He merely snapped, "Why do you tolerate these things? As a nation, we are what we are today because of our lack of positive grip over our affairs.
We don't know where we are going or why. It is a part of the policy of drift, which is our curse." I left him alone.
After all, one should learn to bear one's burdens. Still, 2 days later the oppression on my mind was so great that I buttonholed the poet when he was struggling to start on the 7th canto of his opus. I asked what he would do in my place, and immediately almost feared that the poet might suggest reading poetry aloud as a possible step to drive out the killer.
He took time to comprehend my problem. Even for myself, the more I attempted to speak it out, the more incomprehensible it seemed to me. It left me wondering if I was making too much of a very simple matter. When he did comprehend, the poet asked, "Why don't you try to raise the rent?"
I beat my brow. "Oh, Kavi, do I have to tell you that I am not a rentier?"
I let him in as a friend and not as a tenant. "Do you want to heap on my head the reputation of being a man who takes rent for his attic space?" The poet looked bewildered and said, "Then you could surely tell him to go."
Why not? It was impossible to explain. My wife also said the same thing.
Though I rarely discussed my problems with her, I had become abnormal and turned to her in my desperation. I was brooding too much on Vasu. His footstep on the wooden stairs sent my heart racing.
I knew that it was involuntary anger which stirred my heart. The trouble was that it was both involuntary and suppressed. My wife said simply, sweetly, as she served my supper, "Ask him to go, that's all. Babu is frightened of him and refuses to go up when I send him to you."
All this worked in my mind. I waited for a chance to have a word with the man. It was like waiting for my father in my childhood.
I often had to spend days and days hoping to catch my father in a happy mood to ask him a favor, such as cash for purchasing a bat or ball or permission to go out on a scouting trip. He was most times preoccupied and busy, and I lost the taste for food until I was able to have a word with him. I would confide in my granduncle and he would help me by introducing the subject with my father at the appropriate moment, when my father was chewing betel leaves after a contented dinner.
When my father turned to question me, I would squirm and find myself tongue-tied, unable to go on with my proposition. I was in a similar predicament now, with the added handicap of not having my granduncle around. I recollected that on the day I saw his dead body stretched out on the bier, my first thought was, "Oh, Lord, who is going to speak for me hereafter?"
I stuck a note on Vasu's attic door when he was away, "May I have a word with you when you have the time," and waited for results. One morning 3 days later he parted the curtain and peeped in while I was at the treadle printing the monosyllable forms. I had now barricaded the passage beyond from the attic stairs to my treadle with steel mesh, so that Vasu always had to come by the front door whenever he wanted to see me.
Now the first thing he said was, "You take pleasure in making me go round, is it?" My heart sank at the sight of him. There was a frown on his terrible brow.
Perhaps he missed a mark or his gun backfired. I commented to myself when I saw him. More dangerous than asking for a concession from my father.
He flourished the note and asked, "Is this for me?" He seemed to possess a sixth sense. He looked grim and unfriendly.
I wondered if someone had been talking to him. Where were the expansive villainies of this man? I missed them badly.
I looked up from my proof and just said, "Nothing urgent. Perhaps we could meet later, if you are busy just now." "If you are busy, it is a different matter, but don't concern yourself with whether I am busy or otherwise."
I am always busy. Yes, I added mentally, as long as the forests are full. He added, "I cannot afford to lounge, if you know what I mean."
"If I had the same luck as your other friends that congregate in your press, reading verse or criticizing the government, I might." That settled it. He was in a mood of challenge.
I suppressed the qualms I had had all along and said, "Will you kindly take a seat? I will join you in a moment." 55 When I went to him 2 minutes later, taking just enough time to put away the paper in hand, he was sitting in his chair, but he said, "You have made a fetish of asking people to sit in this room." This was a surprise attack. "I like to observe the ordinary courtesies," I said.
"Do you mean to say that others don't?" 5 He asked with his face puckering into the usual lines, and I knew that he was getting back into his old mood of devilish banter. I felt relieved. I would have gone to the extent of inquiring even about his dead or dying animals, but I checked myself, feeling an aversion to the subject.
I said, "Vasu, I don't want you to mistake me. Have you been able to secure a house?" "Why?" he asked, suddenly freezing. "I just thought I might ask you, that is all." Not the sort of question a supposedly hospitable person should ask of his guest.
It is an insult. I fought down my racing heart and my tongue ready to dart out like a snake's. I said very casually, "I asked because I require the place for." He asked aggressively, cocked his ear, and waited for my answer.
"Someone is coming to stay with us, and he wants." 55 How many rooms in your own house are occupied? 55 Should one go into all that now? 55 Yes, the question is of interest to me. 5 feet he said, and added, "Otherwise I would not mind if you got all your relatives in the world to come and live with you." 55 I suppressed the obvious retorts.
Aggressive words only generate more aggressive words. Mahatma Gandhi had enjoined on us absolute non-violence in thought and speech, if for no better reason than at least to short-circuit violent speech. I toned down my reply to a cold, businesslike statement.
My guest is a man who likes to stay by himself. Then why should I want to stay in this noisy press? I had no answer for him, and Lai said after some reflection, for years you did nothing more than house old decaying paper there.
Now that I have made it slightly habitable, you are getting ideas. Do you know how much it has cost me to make it livable? The mosquitoes and other vermin eat you up if you are slightly careless, and the roof tile hits your head. There are cobwebs, smoke, and in summer it is a baking oven.
No one but a fool like me would have agreed to live there. All that I could say in reply was something obvious like, is this the return I get for giving you shelter? Or, after all, if you remember, you volunteered to stay, etc., etc., or, after all, you are living on my hospitality, get out if you do not like it. I swallowed back all these remarks.
Instead I said sentimentally, I never expected you would be so upset. Who says I am upset? You are fancying things.
It takes a lot more to upset me. Well, anything else? He asked, rising. Not until his jeep moved did I realize that he had given me no answer to my question.
He had treated it lightly, viciously, indifferently, but all to no purpose. He was gone, and my problem remained unsolved, if anything made worse by my having irritated the man. Stag heads, tiger skins, and petrified feathers were going to surround me forever and ever.
My house was becoming a Noah's Ark, about which I had read in our scripture classes at Albert Mission. There was going to be no help from anywhere. Nobody seemed to understand my predicament.
Everyone ended up with the monotonous conclusion, after all, you invited him to stay with you. I felt completely helpless. Sastry alone grasped the situation and now and then threw in a word of cheer such as, these things cannot go on forever like this, can they?
Or sometimes he rab brazen enough to say, what can he do, after all, if you really want him to clear out? As Lai piled alphabet on alphabet in the composing stick in his hand. He felt it necessary to cheer me up nowadays, as I was involving him in a lot of worrying transactions with our customers.
The Cooperative Society report and ledgers were overdue because I could not muster enough sharpness of mind to check the figures. The cash bill of Anand Bhavan Hotel remained half done for the same reason, and it was he who had to battle with the customers and send them back with a convincing reply. Anyway, he was a slight comfort in a world where there seemed to be no other comfort whatever.
I was lulled into a state of resignation. Vasu saw me less and less. I could hear his steps treading the staircase more emphatically than ever.
I detected in that stamping of feet a challenge and a sense of ownership. I raged within myself every time I heard those footsteps, and I knew I had lost him as a friend. Hereafter our relationship was going to be the coldest, and I would be grateful if he left me alone and did not think of bringing that terrific fist of his against my chin.
That he had not been idle came to light very soon. 5 days passed uneventfully. And then came a brown envelope brought by a court process server.
I mechanically received it, signing the delivery note. Opening it, I read, you are hereby asked to show cause why proceedings should not be instituted against you. C.T. Cetra.
It was from the house rent controller, the most dreaded personality in the town. The charges against me were, 1. That I had given part of my press for rent without sanction to one Mr. Vasu, and 2. That I was trying to evict a tenant by unlawful means. It took me time to understand what it meant.
Vasu had filed a complaint against me as a landlord. There was also a complaint that I was not maintaining the house in a habitable condition, which involved the said tenant in great loss and damage and expense. This took me into a set of new activities.
So far I had not known what it was to receive a court summons. I really did not know where to start and what to do next. Litigation was not in my nature.
It was a thing I avoided. I had a shuddering fear of courts and lawyers, perhaps since the days when my uncles let them loose on my father and there was no other topic of discussion at home for months on end. I put the summons away. They had given me 3 days' time to attend to it, a sort of reprieve.
It gave me a feeling of being on parole. I did not confide even in Mr. Sastry. I spoke to no one about it.
I realized that it would be futile to speak about it to anyone. No one was going to understand. Everyone would treat me as if I had done some unlawful act on the sly and was now caught, or trot out the old advice, after all, it was you who agreed to take that man in. You have only yourself to blame.
The situation seemed so dark that I surrendered myself to it in a mood of complete resignation. I even began to look relaxed. I attended to my work normally, listened to jokes and responded to them normally at my press.
I counted the days, 72 hours more, 60, 24. Tomorrow I should probably be led off straight from the court to the jail, and everyone was going to have a surprise, and Vasu would probably chase out Mr. Sastry and my customers and utilize my front room and all the rest of the space for arranging his art pieces. People would get used to it in due course and cease to refer to the place as a press, but rather call it a museum.
My wife and child would fend for themselves and visit me in the prison on permissible days. A strange sense of relief came over me when, as it seemed to me, my mind had been made up on all these issues, and I knew where I was going to end.
People would no doubt sympathize with me but always conclude with, who asked him to encourage that man, anyway? He brought it all on his own head. Let him not blame others.
On the last day of my freedom, at dawn, I had gone as usual to the river for a bath and was returning to my house at 5:30. This was where I always used to meet the adjournment lawyer. An idea struck me. It had never occurred to me till now that he could be of use.
I'd viewed him only as a printing customer. Since I had printed his cards, he had been avoiding me, because of the unpaid bill. The marriage was over, and the bill had become stale. After all, I only charged him 90 rupees for the entire lot of 1000 cards.
Nowadays I never saw him even in my morning walk back from the river. Perhaps Lai detoured and took a parallel road. But today, as my luck would have it, the man came up, face to face.
A great feeling of relief came over me. Ah, my friend, I cried at the sight of him. Just the person I was hoping to meet.
He looked panic-stricken. Luckily I cornered him at the bend of Kabir Street where the house of the barber abuts the street, and with the storm drain on the other side a man cannot easily slip out if his path is blocked. He said awkwardly, just today I was planning to see you at the press.
You know, with one thing and another, after my daughter's marriage. I felt overjoyed to see him, and asked him breezily, how is your daughter? Has she joined her husband?
How is your son-in-law? How do you fare in the role of a father-in-law? He said, most people think with the wedding all one's troubles are over.
It's only half the battle. Ha, ha. I laughed in order to please him.
I didn't want him to think that I had accosted him so early in the day for my unpaid bill. He said, it's only after a marriage that one discovers how vicious one's new relatives can be. How many things they demand and keep demanding?
Oh, God. That's true, I said, taking your daughter up and down to visit her mother-in-law. That I wouldn't mind, he said.
After all, she is our child. It's my duty to help her travel in comfort. Yes, I said, wondering what it was that he really minded. His answer was not long in coming.
All sorts of things, all sorts of things. The first rays of the sun touched up the walls of the barber's house with the glory of morning. Sparrows and crows were flying already in search of grain and worms.
As I looked at them, a part of my mind reflected how lucky they were to be away from Vasu's attic windows. The lawyer was talking, habituated to rambling on with a sentence until the court rose for lunch. The presents demanded are enough to sink one, he was saying.
The new son-in-law must be propitiated all the year round, I suppose, he said with a grim humor. He must be given a present because it's the 6th month after the wedding, because it's the month of Adi, because it is Deepavali, because it is this and that. Every time you think of the great man, you should part with 100 rupees in cash or clothes. It's all old, silly custom. Our women are responsible for keeping up these things.
I would not blame the young man. What can he do? It's his mother who demands them, and the bride's mother at once responds by nagging her husband. These women know that if a man is sufficiently nagged, he will somehow find the cash.
So, I thought, may I know if the good lady can be made to take an interest in the payment of my bill? The man said, as if reading my thought, now you know why I could not really come over to see you. In spite of one's best efforts, small payments get left out.
In all, I had to find about 10,000 rupees for the marriage, savings, borrowings, loans, all kinds of things. Anyway, it is all over. I will not have to face a similar bother for at least a decade more. My second daughter is just 6 years old.
That gives you a lot of time, I said. and I hoped he would now let me say a word about my own problem. But he added, I am sorry I kept your bill so long, it escaped my notice. Oh, that's all right, I said reassuringly.
I knew you must have been busy. Some of my customers are like a safe deposit for me, I know. I can ask for my money whenever I want.
Don't worry, sir, I would not mistake you. Don't trouble to come to my press. I can send Sastri to collect the amount from you.
This I added out of a sudden apprehension that Lai might think I was writing off the account. The sun had grown brighter now, and still I had not told him of my problem. I did not know how to make a beginning in a litigation.
He was bestirring himself to move off, having had his say and left nothing unsaid. I said quickly, I want to sec you on a legal matter. He drew himself up proudly now.
He was on his own ground. He asked brusquely, any more problems coming out of your property matters? I thought they had all been settled once for all.
No, it's not that, I began. Or are you thinking of a partnership deed? Lot of businessmen are doing it now, you know.
Oh, no, I am not such a big businessman. Or estate duty, have you any trouble on that account? I laughed. Fortunately, I owe nothing to bring the estate duty on my head.
Or Shop Assistance Act, or sales tax. You know, half the trouble with sales tax problems is due to lack of definition in the phrasing of the act. Today I could tweak the nose of any sales tax official who dared to tamper with my client, with all their half-digested manuals.
I have a summons from the rent controller. What for? He asked. Do you know how many persons? He began, but I wrested the initiative from him and cut in.
It is some fancy summons, as you'll see. Can I meet you at home? No, he said. Come to my office.
His office was above a cotton warehouse, or rather a bedmaker's shop, and cotton fluff was always flying about, and clients who went to him once never went there again. As they sneezed interminably and caught the death of cold, it was particularly upsetting to asthmatics, who were ill for weeks after a legal consultation with him. His clients preferred to see him as he lounged about the premises of the district court in search of business, and he tackled their problems standing in the veranda of the court or under the shade of a tamarind tree in the compound.
But he liked his inexperienced clients first to meet him at his office and catch a cold. I tried to dodge his proposal, but he was adamant. I should meet him in the narrow room above the cotton shop. I went sneezing up the wooden stairs.
The staircase was narrower than the one leading to my attic devoted to dead wildlife, and creaked in a manner which dimmed the sneezings of a visitor. Although I was born and bred in that district, this was the first time I had been in Abu Lane, which was only 4 roads from my press, conveniently tucked away from the views and turmoils of Market Road. There you saw the lawyer's signboard, bleached by time and weather, Mr. Pleader, nailed to a pillar on which a more aggressive board announced Nandi Cotton Corporation, where you saw no one at first but only bales and bales of cotton, and then a heap in a corner with some women beating them into fluff for bed making.
It was this process that spread tuberculosis and asthma to would-be litigants. Our lawyer's chamber was right on the landing. It must have been a modified landing space converted into a room, where he had 1 table, 1 chair, and 1 bureau full of law books. His clients had to stand before him and talk.
His table was covered with dusty paper bundles, old copies of law reports, a dry inkwell, and an abandoned pen. His black alpaca coat, going moss green with age, hung by a nail on the wall. Down below, the cotton fluffers kept up a rhythmic beating. He had a very tiny window with wooden bars behind him, and through it one saw the coconut tree by a neighboring house, a kitchen chimney smoking, and a number of sloping roof tiles, smoky and dusty and with pieces of tinsel gleaming in the bright sun.
Allergy, he cried on seeing me. My sneezings had announced my arrival. I stepped in, blowing my nose and rubbing my eyes.
There was a beatific smile on his face, and his single tooth was exposed. He sat at the table and commented, some people suffer from allergy to dust and cotton. But I never noticed such things.
He seemed gratified at the superior physique granted to him by God, almost seemed to feel that it was through a special arrangement between himself and God that it was made possible. He enjoyed the sight of allergy in others, as it seemed to give him an assurance that God was especially good to him. Allergy, they say, is just mental, that's all, he said. It is something you should overcome by your own resolution, he said grandly.
I stood at the edge of his table like a supplicant and placed before him the brown cover. He put on his spectacles, opened out the paper, spread it out with the palm of his hand, put a weight on it, the inkless bottle, reared back his head in order to adjust his vision, and read. His unshaven jowl and chin sparkled as if dusted over with silver powder.
He sighed deeply. Of course you have given him no sort of receipt? Receipt? What for?
I asked. For the rent, I mean, and I believe you have been sensible enough not to take a check from him? I was appalled.
This man was falling into the pattern of all the others, including my wife. I simply declared, I have not rented him the house. Have you taken a lump sum? He asked.
Look here, he is not my tenant. Whose tenant is he, then? He asked, cross-examining me. I don't know.
I can't say. I was losing my equanimity. Why were people so pig-headed as not to know or want to understand my position?
My legs felt heavy with the climbing of this ladder, and this man would not give me a seat. He seemed to delight in punishing people who came to see him. I could hardly recognize my own voice, it sounded so thick with the cotton dust. The man was pursuing his inquiry.
If he is not your tenant, what is he? He is not a tenant but a friend, I said, almost unable to substitute any other word. He was quick to catch it. Friend.
Oh. What sort of friend that has gone and filed a complaint against you?
This is a fairly serious offense, according to the present Housing Act. Why could you not have straightaway gone through the usual formalities? That's, stop. Stop.
I cried. I swear that I gave the attic free, absolutely free to that man, because he asked for it. If I were a judge, I would not believe you.
Why should you let him live with you? Is he a relative? No, thank God. It's the only thing that is good about the present situation.
Are you indebted to him in any way? No. On the contrary, he should feel himself in debt to me, and yet he doesn't hesitate to hang me.
I cried. I explained at length how Vasu had come in search of me and how it had all come about. Finding that perhaps this lawyer was feeling too sympathetic to my enemy, I tried to win him over by saying, you remember that day when you came to print the wedding invitation, and how he pulled me out and left you. That's how he does everything.
You now understand what he is capable of? That prejudiced his mind. He reflected with some bitterness. And I had to sit there and waste a whole day to no purpose.
He spoke to me on many legal technicalities and took charge of my paper. He pulled out of his drawer a sheet of paper and took my signature. Then he put away the whole thing with relief.
I'll deal with it, don't worry yourself any more about it. How much money have you now? Not an anna, I said, and showed him my pocket to prove it. He looked gloomy at my bankruptcy.
I would not charge more than a minimum, you know. Some routine charges have to be paid, stamp charges, affidavit charges, and coffee charges for the bench clerk. He is the man to help us, you know.
Oh, how? Don't ask questions. Now I'm wondering how to pay these charges, absolutely nominal, you know. If you can spare about 5 rupees, I thought since you have, you might adjust your account with me.
He threw up his arms in horror. Oh, no, never mix up accounts. 2 different things, absolutely different situations.
Don't mix up accounts. Whatever else you may do. It always leads to trouble.
Can't you send someone to your press to fetch your purse, if you have left it there? I felt like banging my fist on his table and demanding immediate settlement of my press account, but I felt humbled by circumstances. The lawyer had to save me from prison now. So I said, if you will manage it somehow today, I shall send the amount to your house as soon as I am back at the press.
I am not going home. There is no time today for me to go to the court if I go home, and so, I don't want to seem to trouble you too much, but I thought one wouldn't start out on a business like this without cash of any kind. I came out only to consult you, I said.
I hope you have found it satisfactory, he said ceremoniously. Yes, of course, I said. I felt like a pauper petitioning for help.
How long would he keep me standing like this? I could not afford to be critical. So I asked breezily, now what is to be done?
First things first. He studied the sheet of paper intently. The summons is for 11 a.m. tomorrow, Tuesday the 24th. Today is Monday the 23rd.
It is 10:30 now. I must file your application for non-appearance almost at once. The rule gives 24 hours if a summons is to be non-responded.
It would have been a different matter if you had dodged the summons. Did you sign that little paper the fellow had? Yes, of course. Ah, inexperience, he cried.
You should have consulted me before touching it or looking at it. I had no idea it was coming, I said, putting into it all the shock I had felt at Vasu's treachery. That's true, he said.
You must have thought it was some printing business from the district court, huh? Now, is that all? I asked. Yes, he said.
I can always depend upon the bench clerk to help me. I'll do what I can. You must feel happy if you are not on the list tomorrow.
I'll have to plead that 3 you are away and need more time or notice. But everybody can see me at my press, I said. Oh, yes, that's a point.
But how can the court take cognizance if you are there? In any event, it'll be better if you don't make yourself too conspicuous during the hours of the court sitting. Except when I'm called out, I'm most times behind the blue curtain, I said.
That's good. It is always helpful, he said. And what's the next step? You will be free at least for 4 weeks. Rent court is rather overworked nowadays.
They won't be able to reissue the summons for at least 4 weeks, he said. I felt grateful to the man for saving my neck for 4 weeks, and now he added a doubt. Perhaps the complainant will file an objection.
He may also say that I've not gone anywhere, as he lives right over my head. But the court is not bound to take cognizance of what he says. It's not that way that your mala feeders can be established.
I didn't understand what he meant. I have some work now, I said apologetically. I did not want to hurt his feelings with the least hint that I didn't like to be kept standing there while he talked, though as a matter of fact my legs were paining.
You may go, he said grandly. I'll be back home at 3 o'clock. I will manage it all somehow.
If you are sending anyone at all to my house, send an envelope with 10 rupees in it. Anyway, I'll give you a complete accounting when it is all over. The proof of the lawyer's handiwork, I was sitting unscathed at my press, printing 3 color labels, on the day following my D-Day.
I gladly sent him 10 rupees through Sastri. He would account for it all at the end. I was not to mix up accounts.
Great words of wisdom, it seemed to me in my fevered state.